what you just watched was 100% shot on a phone. Honestly, I'm starting to get a bit worried. Like, I used to think I was a cameraman. Apparently not. Now I'm a phone man. I don't really want to be a phone man. I prefer the cameraman thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, just rings me bell a bit better. But anyway, these things are getting way too good for my liking. The Sony Xperia PRO-I is an absolutely mad camera. I've been using this thing for about 6 months and I thought, yeah, it's about time I shot something proper with it. So I shot something proper with it, and I also shot the entire behind the scenes to show you lot exactly how I shoot with the Sony Xperia PRO-I, and also give you my top tips on how to shoot with this phone to get the absolute maximum out of it, because it is a bit naughty, this phone. So instead of like boring you in the studio and that, let's take you straight back to the shoot and I can show you the behind the scenes. Bosh. What's going on, you lot? I hope you're all sweet. So we're shooting on Sony Xperia PRO-I today. We're at Mill Lane motocross track and I got my man Bob. Turns out Bob's all right on a motorbike. We've got that 1-inch sensor, f2, f4 lens, which is absolutely banging. We've got 4K 120, touch tracking, autofocus, real-time eye tracking. We're going to be knocking about on this track, doing a couple of little setups here, utilising all the features on this phone. And I want to give you lot my top tips to shooting with this thing, because it really is an amazing tool. So let's get into doing a little bit of shooting. 3, 2, yeah, and action. All right then, Bob, let's go. 3, 2, action. Cool. 3, 2, and action. Nice. Right, so my absolute #1 tip to shooting with the Xperia PRO-I is pretty much imperative across like every single camera, to me anyway, personally. Keep that 180-degree rule when you're shooting. Your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. And to me, a shot just looks like it's shot on a phone if that shutter speed's up at like 1/2000th of a second. We've seen them TikTok videos, every phone video that's in a bright environment, so jittery, mate, and you just know that's shot on a phone. So if you want to make your phone shots look cinematic, definitely get yourself some ND filters. You can go all the way down to f2 on that 1-inch sensor, keep your shutter speed at 1/50th of a second, and it looks sick. So that'll be my like absolute #1 tip. You'll notice today, every single shot will be shot at a 180-degree shutter rule. It just looks so much nicer, so much more dynamic. Now, a way to make sure that you keep your 180-degree rule and you keep that shutter speed nice and low is the use of ND filters. Definitely pick yourself up like a really cheap set of ND filters that you can just clip onto the phone, and that is going to allow you to get the perfect exposure whilst keeping your shutter speed nice and low. So tip #2, that is protecting your highlights. On the Xperia PRO-I, we haven't got a ton of dynamic range, and I've noticed when you blow out them highlights, you definitely can't get them back. But I have noticed that when we slightly underexpose for them highlights, we can actually lift up our shadows a touch to bring back that detail. So if you've got a really high contrast scene like I've got at the start of the video, definitely expose for them highlights and then make sure that you slightly bring up them shadows in post. That is going to make sure that you get the nicest amount of dynamic range and also get a really nice exposure on your shot. Do whatever you can to not blow out your highlights, expose for them highlights. Like now, this particular shot here, we've got the sun coming right past Bob, pretty much as contrasty as it's going to get. So what I'm doing is I'm bouncing a little bit of light back into Bob and I'm going to expose as much as I can for them highlights. Obviously it's going to blow out because we're shooting directly into the sun, but most of the shot is going to look perfect. Cool. And action. Action. There it is, got it. So I'm shooting in 60p there, so once that's slowed down, that'll be a really, really nice shot. Them goggles look, they're nuts, mate. Yeah, that's well nice, mate. So tip #3, that is utilising that 1-inch sensor. The 1-inch sensor on this phone is the biggest highlight about it, so you want to make sure that you utilise it, and that is making sure that you can shoot down at f2, making sure that we get a really nice shallow depth of field. So obviously this phone has got a nice big sensor combined with an f2 lens, allows us to get a really nice like actual shallow depth of field. And to get the most out of that shallow depth of field, you want to get like nice and close to a subject. The closer you are to a subject with like a deeper background, obviously you're going to get a nicer shallower depth of field. So if you really want to like emphasize that shallow depth of field, get nice and close to your subject, and that is really going to like punch that out and make it just look so much better.
Now you'll notice that I get really nice and close to certain parts of the image, like the helmet, like on the handlebars, and that really emphasises that shallow depth of field. The closer you are to a subject, the more shallow depth of field you're going to get in the background, because you've got a deeper amount of room behind your subject, and that throws it further out of focus. So if you really want to isolate a certain subject or a certain object in your scene, get really nice and close to it, shoot down at f2 instead of shooting at f4. That is going to give you the maximum depth of field that you can possibly get with this phone.
Can you bring the bike around just so that just comes into the light? There, that's the one. Sweet. Let's just going to get a few general like B-roll shots.
Now that 1-inch sensor doesn't just give us a nice amount of depth of field, it also allows us to get a really nice low light performance. And having a 1-inch sensor that goes all the way down to f2 on the lens allows us to pour loads of light into it. So if you're shooting in a low light scenario, obviously shoot at f2, and also don't be afraid to bump up your ISO. I was shooting all the way up at 2500 ISO in them scenes, and it's somewhat clean, especially for a phone. On phones, we've noticed that you definitely can't be pushing your ISO, but on the Xperia Pro-I, don't be afraid to pump up that ISO, because it gets a really nice performance even at them nice high ISO levels. Tip number 4, and that is utilising the autofocus on this phone. Obviously, we've got real-time face and eye tracking, which is absolutely amazing. I definitely recommend turning that on, especially if you're obviously shooting a real-life human subject. And we've also got touch tracking. Touch tracking for me is one of the best features that is on this phone, especially shooting a motocross scene. We've got a geezer who's got a helmet on. Clearly, the phone doesn't see that as a face, can't track it. But if I touch the focus on that helmet, I've got that character bang in focus the entire time.
Usually, if Bob didn't have a helmet on, then we'd be able to track his face, but because he has, we can't actually see he's got a face. So touch tracking is perfect for this kind of scenario. This is like 101 touch tracking scene. Got a plane coming over the top, so let's utilise this. 3, 2, and action.
And if he decides to take off his helmet, it then moves over to face and eye tracking. Perfect, mate.
Right, so what I'm going to do is when he comes around this corner, this is like a perfect opportunity to try to tap to focus. So as soon as he comes around that corner, I'm going to tap on him, and hopefully we track him all the way around. We'll see if the phone can do it, because that'll look the nuts.
Next up is utilising all 3 of them lenses. We've got a 16mm, we've got a 50mm, and we've got that 24mm. Something that I notice all the time that just makes videos look like it's shot on a phone is the fact that you've shot at the exact same focal length for every single different shot, and it just looks a bit boring. It doesn't look dynamic. It doesn't look like you've changed focal lengths, because you haven't. Your focal length stayed at that 24mm the entire time. Utilising the 50mm is really important. I like to kind of punch in and compress that space. Combined with that 24mm and the 16mm, it's nice to get them really wide shots when it makes sense. Like if you're going to establish, I wanted to establish the scene slightly later on.
I want to get a shot of you, like a wide shot, because I need to establish. We haven't really established where we are just yet. So I'm going to do a wider shot showing that we are at a track, because everything we've shot so far is pretty much this way or really tight.
So I established the scene at that 24mm, but a lot of the times when I was shooting nice and close up at 50mm.
So I'm going to go 50mm now, so that I can compress the space. Let's give it a little bit more. Basically makes all the movement, especially handheld, when you go a bit tighter, makes it a little bit more dramatic. So that's what I want with this shot. I want to match his, how dramatic his riding is. So let's go 50mm.
50mm for me is one of my favourite focal lengths, but I definitely use it at the right times. I don't just shoot at 50mm for the sake of it. If I want to go close up and I really want to focus on a specific object, or if I want to go close up on a face, compress the space, or if I want to emphasise a bit of movement in the frame, 50mm for me works perfect when you go handheld. Next up, we've got that 4K 120. We don't even see 4K 120 in some high-end mirrorless and cinema cameras, so we definitely want to utilise it, but don't overdo it. It is so easy to overdo 120 frames if you're doing everything in slow motion. My top tip would be try to use it in the right places. Obviously, motocross is a perfect example to use it, because you really want to emphasize and slow down certain moments to make it more impactful. But make sure that you switch up them frame rates if it makes sense for your project. Have a bit of 24, have a little bit of 4K 120, enjoy yourself, but obviously just don't overdo it. And finally, your shooting styles. Now, you lot already know I'm a huge fan of handheld shooting. I just love the energy that comes with handheld. And I've noticed on this phone, you can shoot beautiful handheld stuff.
You probably notice I like shake it a little bit, because when it comes around, it just like adds to all that drama. So like on this phone anyway, I like to actually turn off the stabilisation for handheld, because sometimes when you've got stabilisation and handheld and you're keeping your shutter low, it just doesn't look particularly natural. I like to keep the shutter or the stabilisation when you actually got stable shots. So let's get this now. Oh, I love it, man. I love shooting action so much. Handheld at 50mm looks so nice. Like, I prefer handheld at like anywhere between 35 and like 70mm. Yes, bro.
I actually like turning off image stabilisation when I'm shooting handheld. I just like the characteristic of natural, completely unstabilised handheld shots. If you're going to stabilise the shot, try and stabilise it as much as you can with your hands. Don't bother just turning on the image stabilisation and trying to let that do all the work. I turn on image stabilisation when I need a nice and stable shot, specifically on a gimbal, for example. If I'm shooting on a gimbal, I actually like to have my stabilisation on because it just emphasises and helps stabilise that already stabilised shot. However, if I'm doing handheld, which I like to do a lot of the times, it just gives a lot of energy, especially at that 50mm. That 50mm looks so nice handheld. You can really give it a nice amount of shake, add some energy into the shot, and it gives the shot a completely different characteristic.
Yes, that's the one, boy.
If you lot want to see that entire kind of raw behind the scenes footage, I'll literally dump the whole lot. I'll upload all of that completely raw footage if you want me to. Just let me know in the comments. So you lot, those are my top tips to shooting with the Sony Xperia PRO-I. I'll leave all the links in the description for everything you need to know about the Xperia PRO-I. And as always, people, I'll be catching you lot in the next one, mate. Oh, shit.